Welcome to Emerald Ash Borer University, which is made possible by a grant from the USDA Forest Service. This is Robin Usborne from Michigan State University, and along with my EAB University colleagues, Cliff Sadoff and Bob Bruner from Purdue University and Amy Stone from Ohio State University Extension, we welcome you to today's webinar, Changing Climates and Forest Insects, a case study with Hemlock Woolly Adelgid in Michigan, presented by Deborah McCullough, forest entomologist at Michigan State University. Dr. McCullough's work includes research, extension, and teaching responsibilities on the ecology, impacts, and management of forest insects, particularly invasive species including emerald ash borer, beech bark disease, and Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. She works with forest managers, regulatory officials, arborists, and landowners to develop sustainable management strategies to protect forest health. Her knowledge and expertise has been sought on an international scale, and we are excited to have her today. To our participants today, we welcome your questions and comments. Please type them in the Q&A feature or the chat pod, and we will respond to them after the webinar presentation. An email will be sent out to all live participants that will include Deb's contact information if you have questions and comments after the webinar is over. For those of you wanting ISA certified arborist CEUs, they are available for this live webinar. Information on how to obtain them will be in an email that you will receive tomorrow. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing later on the EAB University page of the www.emeraldashborer.info website. Thank you for attending today, everyone. And Deb, please begin your presentation.
Okie dokie. Robin is telling me that I cannot start my video because the host has stopped it.
Now, do you want to do video? But we're seeing your we are seeing your presentation, your PowerPoint.
Oh, are you? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like you're not on my end of things.
They're lying.
Okay. Well, hello, people who are viewing this live and in person. I appreciate Robin inviting me. And like she said, I'm Deb McCullough and have been working on Hemlock Woolly Adelgid in Michigan for the past 6 or 7 years now. And just briefly, I think everybody that would be looking at this webinar is very much familiar with climate change. Many regions of the world are being affected in terms of different temperatures, different precipitation patterns. We've all seen the wildfires, we've seen the floods and so forth. And when you bring that back down to insects have to deal with temperatures a lot. They're cold-blooded ectotherms, so very much affected in terms of what they can do in their activity, how their phenological development advances, everything from egg hatch to immature stages, feeding and molting and so forth. And if you think about the insect populations in any given region, that population is typically well adapted to the temperatures, precipitation, but especially to the temperatures that characterize that particular region. And when you start getting extremes, temperature extremes, either too hot or too cold, that's where insect populations can have a problem. And so that's kind of the focus today, Hemlock Woolly Adelgid in Michigan and what is happening in terms of the climate here, particularly winter climate in Michigan and this Lake States region. I have a number of very important co-authors here. Mike Kiefer is a postdoc researcher in the Department of Geography, very much involved with projecting temperatures and working with some of the data we've collected. Jeff Andreessen is a professor here at MSU. He's also the state climatologist. And between Mike and Jeff, they provided some of the cool maps you're going to see today. Justin and James, back when James was a grad student or a technician, they did some of the field work that I'm going to show you today. So with that, I thought we'd jump in and do a little overview of Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. I don't know, I can't tell who's watching, and some of you may be very familiar with this insect, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, this is an insect that is native to Japan. It came into the eastern US. It was first detected in 1951 in Virginia, and it has been spreading ever since. There's at least 18 states now that have established populations of Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. We didn't think that we had it until the summer of 2015, when some infested trees were found in Ottawa County down by Holland, Michigan, in the southwest part of the state. We know that Hemlock Woolly Adelgid has been moved long distances on hemlock nursery trees coming out of infested states and so forth, and we think that's probably how it came into Michigan. And what adelgids do, you can see a scanning electron microscopy photo there in the upper left. That is an adelgid that, oops, what happened? Something just happened. Go back there. This is an adelgid. All the wax has been pulled off of this little adelgid, and you can kind of see her mouth parts up here. And this is an adelgid on the base of a needle. That's where they feed, and she will pierce the base of the needle with her stylet, okay, this little mouth part here. And this stylet will go all the way through the base of the needle and into the shoot, and she is going to suck nutrients out of the cells that line the vascular tissue in the woody twigs. And as these adelgids feed, they secrete, they don't excrete, but they secrete filaments of white wax from pores that are all over their body. And so you get these little adelgids here surrounded by this white woolly wax, and that's what gives them their name, Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. And so in North America, we have 2 generations of Hemlock Woolly Adelgid every year, and they are both parthenogenic, which means it's all females. There are no males, there is no mating. The females will lay eggs, and those eggs will hatch into sisters that, unless there's mutation, those sisters will be genetically identical to their mom and to each other. So the first generation, and the one that we're most interested in today, we call it the sistens. And they feed all through the winter, which is very unusual. Most insects are in a dormant stage if they live in a place, a temperate climate that has a winter. But these sistens will start feeding somewhere around late October or early November. They feed all through the winter. They mature sometime in the late spring, and they will produce eggs. And the eggs hatch within a couple of weeks into the second generation that is called the progrediens. And the progrediens develop much more quickly. They're going to feed in May and June. They lay eggs. Those eggs hatch into the sistens. And what's unusual is the sistens then estivate through the summer. In other words, they stay dormant. And you can see these little black, they look like kind of little pepper grains almost. And they have a white waxy halo around themselves, and they just hang out all summer until it starts getting cold again and the tree is going dormant, and then they move to the base of a needle, insert their mouth parts, start sucking, and begin feeding. Once these insects begin feeding, they're going to molt, okay? And when they molt that first time, they lose their little tiny legs. The crawlers, that's what we call that first stage, right after they hatch out of the eggs, is really the only stage that is mobile. Once they put their mouth parts through the base of the needle, they don't leave that spot ever again. But the crawlers can move about. They can move around on a tree. If you have trees with overlapping branches, they can move from one tree to another tree that way. And we also are real confident that they can be blown in the wind and definitely carried on birds and possibly other kinds of wildlife. And if they land on another hemlock tree, they're going to find a good feeding spot and start feeding again. Eastern hemlock, which is what we have in Michigan, Wisconsin, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean in Canada, and New England, all the way down into the mid-Atlantic region. This eastern hemlock species is very vulnerable to Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. And so a few adelgids feeding is not a real big deal, but as the densities build and as the insects are feeding year after year, obviously that's going to take an effect on the tree. And you will see needles drop, buds will die, the canopies become very thin, the trees kind of take on a grayish appearance. And in the east, they will talk about trees dying anywhere from 2 to 10 years after they first become infested. If you have any kind of stress from drought or from a defoliator, something like that, the trees can die even more quickly. And that picture in the lower left on the hillside there, that is from New England. And you can see, you can pick out the hemlocks because those are those dead skeletons of trees there. And I had hoped that I would never see that in Michigan. And yet those pictures all across the top there, those are hemlocks that were in Muskegon County, and those trees are dead now. So it's progressing here just like it does in most other places. People that like hemlocks, which is almost everybody that likes to be outside and recreate and hike and so forth, really disappointing and depressing to see Hemlock Adelgid become established. We have over 170 million hemlocks in forests. They tend to be right skewed in terms of age class. In other words, we have a lot of big old hemlocks. We don't have very many young, vigorous hemlocks. Largely because of deer browse. We get seeds, they germinate, the seedlings start to grow, and then especially in the winter and spring, the deer will come through and they just love eating those young hemlocks. And you can see a map there. Sue Crocker with the Forest Service in St. Paul provided that map. That's the most up-to-date FIA data. And you can see the dark blue is where we have lots and lots of hemlock, basal area, lots of big trees. And in anywhere that's green or even the yellow areas, we have plenty of hemlock. You can see it's pretty much concentrated in northern, lower, and upper Michigan, but certainly it extends down along Lake Michigan and over by Lake Huron. And in Michigan in particular, not only do these hemlock trees provide very important cover for wildlife in the winter, but also in the summertime, they stabilize the dunes. And so a lot of the big sandy dunes that run along Lake Michigan, the Great Lakes, have hemlock trees growing on them where they play a real important role in maintaining, keeping that sand from basically blowing and being lost. Hemlocks are also very shallow rooted. And so because of that, you typically find a lot of hemlocks along streams and rivers and lakes, riparian forests, and obviously they have a big impact on water quality and water temperatures as well as on the terrestrial side. And so this is kind of the progression of Hemlock Woolly Adelgid in Michigan. Localized infestation was found in 2015. You see a little red dot down there. 2016 picked up a couple more. 2017, by the end of 2017, we had 3 counties where infestations had been found, and things have continued to progress since then. As of early February 2022, we had 5 counties, and you see those red spots. Those are all localized infestations of Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, and you probably already discerned that they're just along that Lake Michigan shoreline. And it's very striking, this distribution. There's really nothing comparable. If you look down in Ottawa County, you see some red dots starting to move further east. They're following some river drainages to the east, but clearly something's going on with the Lake Michigan shoreline. And so there's a couple different reasons that might be underlying this distribution. One is that if you own property and have a house along Lake Michigan, you have succeeded at the financial game of life. Okay, that is high dollar property. And what some of the landscapers, actually many of the landscapers that work in this area, the people that own these properties tend to like to see a full forest around their house, and they will bring in young hemlock trees, young nursery trees, and plant them beneath the larger native trees. And we think that that's how Hemlock Woolly Adelgid first got into Michigan. So there's some anecdotal evidence from some property owners about trees that were planted even in the early to mid 90s that may have started our infestations. Secondly, you know, the native hemlock distribution, we don't have a whole lot of forest that has hemlock in it as you get into the southern part of lower Michigan. Certainly there's a band though that runs along Lake Michigan, and then lots and lots in northern, lower, and upper Michigan. But we also think that much of this has to do with lake effect weather. And if you live in any place like Buffalo, New York, or Erie, Pennsylvania, one of those kinds of places, you're familiar with lake effect weather. And the reason this is important is because these cystins are feeding all through the winter. And we know from other areas of the country that have a longer history of Hemlock Woolly Adelgid that the cystins are vulnerable when the temperatures get really, really cold. So extreme cold temperatures can kill these cystins. And we pulled together as much literature and published studies as we could find. A couple were done in laboratory situations where you can adjust the temperature. Others were field observations where they were looking at whatever the nearest weather station was and relating that to survival of the adelgids. And they do different things. They report different variables. In some cases, they were looking at the mean daily winter temperatures. Other studies looked at the number of days below a threshold temperature, which is typically minus 20 C. Okay, Celsius, that would be -4 Fahrenheit. And most of the studies, especially the more recent ones, have looked at the extreme minimum winter temperature. In other words, the coldest temperature recorded during the winter. And there's a number of studies that have reported -20 C or -4 Fahrenheit is associated with about 90% of the hemlock adelgids dying, which is good news for those of us that like the hemlock trees more than we like the hemlock adelgids. If it gets colder than that, the levels of mortality tend to go up. -35, that's really, really cold. That was a lab study and some modeling and some work that they did in New England. But -20 seems like it's an important temperature for these adelgids. Now, if you know about lake effect weather, if you're in an area that along the Great Lakes that experiences this, what will happen is you have winter air, you have cold air going across Lake Michigan, which don't underestimate, if you're not familiar with the Great Lakes, these are huge bodies of water. And you get this heavy overcast that comes across the lake. And what the effect of that heavy overcast is to ameliorate temperatures. In other words, it keeps the temperature along Lake Michigan at about 6 degrees warmer on average than the temperatures even 25 miles further inland. Okay, and that's why we grow grapes and blueberries and cherries and so forth. We have that fruit ridge, they call it, up and down the Lake Michigan shoreline. The other thing that happens is that when that heavy overcast hits land, you tend to get really heavy snow. And we'll talk about lake effect snow. It's that same 25 to 30 mile buffer along Lake Michigan that gets this heavier snowfall, and that snow tapers off as you move further to the east. And of course, snow is a good insulator and can potentially protect these adelgids from cold temperatures that might otherwise kill them. This is a map that Mike put together. This is using about 40 years worth of temperatures and looking at average winter temperatures across the Lake States region and down into the upper Midwest there. And one of the things you see is that the lower peninsula of Michigan, we have a big frost pocket more or less in the center of northern lower Michigan. The rest of the southern half of lower Michigan stays relatively warm, minimum temperatures in the -25, -30 range, but right there along Lake Michigan and right where we have our first Hemlock Woolly Adelgid populations is where it stays relatively warm. We just don't have the severe extreme cold on average that we have in some of the rest of lower Michigan. If you look at the UP, it's colder over there on the west side. It's cold up by Sault Ste. Marie there on the east side, and not northern Minnesota cold, fortunately, but still very, very cold in terms of minimum winter temperatures. And there was two winters where we went out to infested sites. One was down by Holland, down towards the southern part of the known Hemlock Adelgid distribution, and one was about 80 miles north in Muskegon County near a town called Norton Shores. And we picked out a big hemlock in each site, and we put microthermal sensors on the underside of the shoots, which is where you're going to find Hemlock Adelgids, 3 heights. So the low sensors were within about a half meter, say 16, 20 inches, maybe as much as 25, 30 inches close to the ground. And then a mid canopy level sensor. And then as high as we could get using a ladder, we put micro sensors on shoots. And we did this on all 4 aspects of the tree. And then during the winter, somebody went out, you can see James in the lower left there. Every couple of weeks, we brought shoots in and we would look at them under a microscope and take the wax off and poke the adelgids and see who was dead and who was alive. And this is what we found the first winter. You can see Holland there in the left. The night of January 9th in 2019, the temperature got down to minus 21 C, which is minus 6 Fahrenheit. And after that night, the shoots that we brought back, more than 90% of the adelgids were dead on those shoots. So that was very consistent with studies that have been published in, New England and high elevation locations in the mid-Atlantic region. In Norton Shores, which is actually further to the north, it didn't get quite as cold, minus 2 Fahrenheit or minus 19 C. And we didn't see a big die-off of these adelgids. We saw some mortality, but basically between that early January date and the end of March, about 20% mortality overall. The next winter, we went to Holland, and on the 30th of January, it got down to minus 22. And after that, the shoots we were bringing in, 70 to 90% of the adelgids were dead. That's the purple line you see there. Norton Shores, that same night, got down to minus 25. And very few of the adelgids that we looked at least on our shoots, were alive. Mortality was in the neighborhood of 90 to 95%. Unfortunately, the next winter, it never got below 0. The coldest temperature recorded was 5 degrees above 0. We didn't really see any cystins mortality. And of course, these insects have 2 generations per year. So the ones that survived reproduce, and then their daughters reproduce again, and so forth. The 2020-2021 winter, there was a 2-week period in February where it was cold for the full 2 weeks. 2 days got above minus 12 centigrade. The minimum temperature was minus 26, and that was in mid-February. And the mortality on the shoots we brought back, about 50 to 70% of the adelgids on those shoots were killed by that cold. I personally was hoping for a lot higher mortality. There's a couple of things that may be going on. One is that the temperatures in February of 2021 kind of gradually got colder. You didn't have an abrupt drop in temperature like we saw the previous 2 winters. And that gradual transition may be something that the adelgids do better with than an abrupt change to a really extreme cold temperature. Also, some of the lab studies have shown that as the adelgids mature, they become more tolerant of cold temperatures. And certainly, mid-February, they've been feeding for a few more weeks. They're starting to be older. They may simply not sustain the same levels of mortality. This is another way of looking at it. These are maps that Jeff produces. The 2013-2014 winter, if you lived here, you probably remember this as the Christmas tree ice storm, or the Great Christmas Ice Storm. Really cold temperatures in January, but also in December. Pretty much across much of lower Michigan. You see the yellow and green areas in northern lower Michigan, as well as the UP. Dark green means it got really cold. The only place where it didn't get quite that cold was right along the lake shore, and especially in Ottawa and Muskegon counties, where our study sites are. The next winter, yeah, we had quite a bit of cold, maybe not as much as we would have liked. Even further north, it stayed a little bit warmer. And then 2019 to 2020, man, that was a warm winter. You look at where we have green, indicating really cold temperatures. -30, -35, and just a couple spots in the UP. This is data that Jeff literally presented yesterday, and we wanted to show some of this to you. During this most recent winter, it was a warm winter. It kind of felt like a warm winter, not every day, but most of the days it did. And it turned out to be the 6th warmest winter on record since going back to 1895. And there were some areas where it got really cold in the Upper Peninsula primarily. You can see over on the west side there where the blue areas are, the east side over by Paradise. But you can see, especially along that western edge of lower Michigan, it just did not get very cold. Overall, about 10 degrees Fahrenheit above normal for our winter temperatures. And that's consistent with what we've seen, not much in the way of mortality of those Hemlock Adelgid cystins. They just fed and did their thing through the winter. Now, one of the, we do have these other winters, fortunately, where it does get cold. And one of the questions that we wanted to look at is in a given site, you have tall trees, you have branches that are up high, branches that are down low and covered by snow. You have branches with adelgids on them that might be on the south side or the north side. How much microclimatic variability can you find in a given site? Is it possible that snow or just a warmer location on a tree could provide a refuge for Hemlock Woolly Adelgid? You could have high mortality, but some portion of the population is able to survive. And so if you look at that map, the 2 red stars are the 2 sites that I showed you previously. We had a weather station there. We had microthermal sensors on a hemlock tree, again at 4 aspects and 3 heights, but also we had a hemlock where each of the blue stars are. So more inland, away from the lake effect weather in lower Michigan, and then 2 up in the UP, Tequamanon and over by Paradise there, Tequamanon Falls. So this is just an example of the kind of data we got. This is from Norton Shores. It is an infested site. And what you can see here in this kind of complicated, looks like something that ChatGPT would have produced. Down on the graph, if you look at the little bars, that's snow depth, okay? And that's actually kind of important. The bright purple lines show the ambient temperature, okay? So what the minimum temperatures were, you can see there was some really cold periods that just happened to coincide with some deep snowfall. That makes sense, a big cold winter storm coming in. If you look, for example, on that early January date there, you see that the red, the dashed black, and the dashed green lines diverge quite a bit from ambient temperatures there. And so that is the temperatures recorded on hemlock shoots on the bottom, the lower east side of the canopy, also on the top north aspect of the canopy, and even on the lower east, the lower east and the top south aspects. And you can think about snow, you can think about exposure to sun. Anything in the upper canopy is going to get a lot more sun than anything in the mid canopy, and anything on the lower canopy is going to be protected by snow if it's deep enough. You can see another date there in mid-February. Again, the temperatures drop except for the bottom east thermal sensor and also that top north thermal sensor. So definitely some microclimatic variation going on. And there are places where if you're an adelgid, you have a better chance of survival compared to other locations on a given tree. This is a little bit complicated here. I'll try to explain it. This is data from the weather station up at Tequamanon in the not very far from Lake Superior, so a very cold location. And again, we had temperature sensors on all 4 aspects at 3 heights. And what you see is what consistently diverged from ambient air temperatures were the sensors on the lowest shoots, whether that was north, south, east, or west aspects. And we're real sure that that's because of snowfall. You can see in one case on the eastern aspect, the sensors on the mid canopy branches, so that'd be roughly, say, 6 feet above ground. They diverged. They were a little bit warmer. That also could be snow, but it could also be early morning sun, for example, keeping those areas warmer. But everything that was high, almost every sensor that was at the mid canopy location was very much similar to ambient air temperature, and kind of starts to show you the importance of snow cover. Again, just another kind of complicated graph, but again, this is at Paradise on the east side of the UP, also very near Lake Superior. And the same general trend holds true here. The sensors on the chutes that were close to the ground and probably covered by snow, or definitely covered by snow, consistently stayed warmer, anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15, even 20 degrees warmer than the sensors on the chutes that were at mid or higher levels in the canopy. A little bit of influence of sun exposure on those high sensors on the east side. You think about early morning sun, but basically if you're not under snow, you would have been exposed to some really cold temperatures. So, there's a lot to kind of think about in terms of what a Hemlock Adelgid population is going to experience in a given site. And if you think about long-term and broader, even global kinds of patterns that we're seeing in much of North America, especially in the US and Canada as well, temperatures are getting warmer, winters are getting warmer, with the exception of the Southeast US. But the rest of us, if you look at these maps that are coming out from NOAA, and this one is from NASA, you can see that overall annual temperatures are getting warmer. Now that could be summer temperatures, but it could also be winter temperatures. And here in the Lake States, in the northeastern part of the US, our winters are definitely getting warmer. You can see here, this is just kind of a map demonstrating that, I guess you could say. Locally, we see this happening. Traverse City, Michigan, a lot of people are familiar with that. It's up in the northwest part of Lower Michigan, right along Lake Michigan. And if you look at from 1951 through 1980, on average, the temperatures, extreme minimum temperatures averaged minus 26 degrees Celsius. More recently, since 1981, that has turned into minus 22.5 degrees Celsius. So, it's not just something in our imagination. It's happening, and it's happening right now, every winter. There are major global climate change models that can be used to project how temperatures are going to increase. And if you look at the 6 major global climate change models for this particular part of Michigan, they're all predicting an increase in mean annual temperatures of 3.5 to 6 degrees Celsius eventually. Do we have to wait for 50 or 60 years to see this manifested? No, we don't. This is a figure that Jeff put together, again, just this week. If you look at the average winter temperature from 1900 basically through 2000, that's that black line that runs right across the middle of that figure. On average, winter temperatures, basically from December through the end of February, averaged about 20.2 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can see, if you look at the blue line, that demonstrates the warming trend. So we're picking up about an extra 3.7 degrees Fahrenheit per century, every 100 years. And in this most recent winter, the average minimum temperature across the state was 26.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you think about that long-term average, that's 7 degrees warmer than average. And it's very consistent with that map that I showed you of overall warming across the country. If we look ahead down the road to, for example, mid-century or late century, things don't get a whole lot better. Again, we had the 6 major global climate change models. They're from Japan, Australia, UK, Canada, and so forth. We got PRISM data, and we looked at temperatures from 1980 to 1999. We considered that to be our base, and then we compared projected winter temperatures, minimum winter temperatures, at mid-century and late century. And those projections were then modified with the regional climate model, which is a way of incorporating the effects of Great Lakes. Okay, so those lake effects, temperatures that stay a little bit warmer and so forth. And these model runs, what I'm going to show you, well, we're all done assuming business as usual. In other words, assuming that there are not substantial reductions in carbon emissions and that. So here, this is mid-century, and mid-century, you know, it's not a long ways off. We're looking at 15 to 20 years. The figure over on the left with the red arrow, that is our base model. So that shows you the minimum winter temperatures averaged over that time period. And if you look at Michigan, you can see again that big frost pocket that we have up in northern lower Michigan. You can see the really cold areas in the western UP. And then you can see most of southern lower Michigan, the southern half, gets about 3 to 4 days below -20 C on average every year. And if you look closely, you can see there's a little bit of a band of purple along Lake Michigan in the south, again, corresponding to right where Hemlock Adelgid got started, and then over on the east side along Lake Huron and Lake Erie as well. Now, if you look at the results from these 6 global climate change models, modified to incorporate Great Lakes effects, things warm up substantially. Anything that is purple means that we're only getting 1 or 2 days below -20 C. Still some cold temperatures, you know, 7 days on average of cold temperatures in northern lower. The western UP continues to stay pretty cold depending on which model you look at, but definitely some warming trends. And if you look along the lakeshore, we're down to 1, 2, maybe as many as 3 or 4 days of cold temperatures per year, which means that an increasing portion of the state is going to be suitable for Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. If we don't get at least -20 C, we can't expect much mortality of these adelgids. If you look at it by end of century, you know, granted this is projecting a long ways out, but these temperature models, depending on how conservative they are, we could be growing bananas, you know, in much of southern Michigan. You still see that it gets a little colder in the northern lower Michigan where we don't have lake effect weather, but most of the rest of lower Michigan at best is sustaining 1 day below -20 C, which means that most of lower Michigan and a good portion of the upper peninsula will be suitable in terms of winter temperatures for Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. These are, if you'll hang with me, I'll try to walk you through these maps. They're a little bit complicated, but again, we have a base model, okay, using temperatures from 1981 to 1999. These are average minimum temperatures. So the coldest winter temperatures averaged across that 30-year time period, 40-year time period. And it's presented as isoclines. And so if you look on the left at that map, the colors, don't worry about that too much. That is showing where we have lots of hemlock, not so much hemlock, so forth. But look at the little red areas. That's where on average, we're going to get temperatures of -30 C fairly commonly. So you see a couple of those spots in northern lower, you see a couple up in the UP. Outside of the area bounded by the pink line, we have an isocline of -25. So the area around that pink area, around those little -30 pockets, that's going to mostly be -25 in terms of average minimum winter temperatures. If you move to the west or to the south of that pink line, then you're getting warmer temperatures, okay? If you look at mid-century, you can see that the area surrounded by that pink line has shrunk considerably. We don't have any more of those little red bounded areas. We're not looking at -30 degrees for an extreme temperature anymore. Much of northern lower Michigan now falls into the -20 area. Okay, so a considerably warmer winters in that area. And then if you look at late century, We don't have a pink line anymore because we don't expect to see average minimum temperatures of -25 anymore. The best we're hoping for is -20. So it's getting warmer, and it's going to keep getting warmer, and it might be getting much, much warmer over the next even 20 years. And of course, in terms of Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, if you're an Adelgid, that's good news. It means that if you can find a tree, there's a very good chance that you will survive and make babies, and your babies will survive, and populations can build up and continue to spread. When we do get an occasional polar vortex, I think the data on the microclimatic variability and the insulating effect of snow cover shows that there is always going to be some kind of a refuge in any given site where some Hemlock Adelgids can survive. And if their offspring are not whacked by a severely cold winter the following year, that population density can start to build back up. I wanted to include this because we now have, as of just a couple of weeks ago, we have a new, very localized infestation right alongside Lake Michigan. Hemlock trees growing on the dunes up in the Crystal Downs area, if you're familiar with that, was just recently detected. You can see the little red spot, and you also see that if we don't get control of that infestation and knock out the Adelgids there, they now are into the area where we have lots and lots of hemlock, which is very disappointing. I think too, our focus has been on Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, but those winter temperatures affect all the organisms that are out there. And, we have spotted lanternfly as a new arrival in Michigan as of last summer. And there's concern about warming winters and the fact that you may not see much, if any, mortality of spotted lanternfly eggs right now in the area that's bounded by the red color in that map. Within 10 years, 15 years, that red color may be much more extensive than it is right now. And of course, it's hard to just kind of run a model and extrapolate out 10 years, 20 years, 30 years into the future, because as we saw with Hemlock Adelgid, it depends. Does the temperature drop abruptly? Does it drop gradually? How vulnerable are the insects at a particular stage? Are they in a well-protected dormant stage? Are they huddled underneath bark and getting some insulative effect from bark as well as snow? It's a lot of forest entomologists are trying to make predictions and waving their hands in the air, and it's just really tough to do because there's so many factors that can influence it. But wildlife are going to be affected by this. Mosquitoes, if we don't have big die-offs of mosquitoes, that's more disease, potentially vectored by those blood-feeding insects, ticks as well. It's not a good time to be in the business of renting snow machines. Winter tourism is going to likely change. And taking care of roads and salt and heating costs and all of that. We're in the process of changing, and I guess change always occurs, but it seems like change is really ramping up in terms of these warmer winters. There's a nice paper, Contasta and several other authors wrote a paper trying to think about all the ways that losing cold winter weather is going to affect regions like the Lake States. So with that, I'm pretty much done. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. I don't know if you put them in the Q&A box or how you want to handle that, Robin.
Well, we do have a question from Matthew Garcia. He has a question about the temperature thresholds. So Matthew, if you'd want to type that in or what you're looking for as far as the question, that would be great.
Yeah, and otherwise, I appreciate everybody that attended today. And while there's a part of me that really likes to see extremely cold temperatures during the winter, it is the end of March and I am ready for spring. So I hope wherever you are, you're having some nice spring weather, either today or certainly by tomorrow. When is it? April starts on Saturday. So I can handle winter in March, but when it gets to be April, I am ready for spring.
Let's see.
And I think we're good. Robin, should I stop sharing?
Yeah, you can just leave that there for a sec.
Okay.
Let's see.
There's a question from Marcia. I'm looking at the text
Yeah,
box
good.
too,
Okay,
Robin.
there we go. Good.
So she is asking, can the hemlock population move north to colder areas to outrun mortality from Hemlock Woolly Adelgid? And will the life cycle of Adelgid make the summer generation help them to genetically shift to a more cold tolerant insect? So that's two questions, Marcia. That's great. In terms of Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, there is evidence from New England. Joe Elkington, he's at University of Massachusetts. They monitored Hemlock Woolly Adelgid survival in a cold area of Massachusetts, and they actually did some genetic work, and they showed that the local population of Hemlock Woolly Adelgid there seemed to shift genetically into a population that was more tolerant of cold winter weather. So, you know, even if we weren't getting warmer, it's possible that the Adelgid mortality would drop simply because of natural selection. Any kind of genotype that is more able to tolerate those cold nights might do better and therefore reproduce more. And then the other part of the question has to do with the hemlock population moving. It's possible. There actually is a lot of interest in assisted migration for hemlock to collect seed from latitudes and take those seeds and germinate and outplant trees at higher latitudes. So I don't know that hemlock can do that naturally. It may take some assistance from the humans that want to see hemlock survive and remain a functional part of a lot of the ecosystems. So hopefully that's what you were asking. And then Matthew was looking at a certain duration below a threshold temperature that would lead to Hemlock Adelgid mortality, or does it just take one single night, or would it have to be additional nights? If you look at some of the lab studies, Parker, for example, did a number of nice studies in the late 1990s, and it doesn't necessarily have to be cold for a very long time. It's, a matter of hours can cause those adelgids to die. Now, when you're talking about adelgids in a field setting, you have some that are in warmer locations, some that are in cooler locations. Having a good solid night of -30°C should result in really high mortality. But I would never say that all the adelgids will die, because those little things, they're under snow, or they're on the southern aspect, or, somewhere they're going to find life has a way of surviving. And just a few adelgids, that may be enough, 2 or 3 years later, you're back to having a high density population. So I think that looks like it.
Yeah, yes, I think so. Like I said, there are going to be, we'll be sending out an email to everyone who was on the live webinar tomorrow with information about how to contact Deb if you have questions afterwards. And also what kind of CEUs, what you have to do to get the CEUs for this webinar. But until then, Deb, thanks so much for sharing all that information. And yes, we appreciate all your hard work. And this is kind of a big warning for people, and I think they need to hear it. So we'll hope that this is only one of many talks that can actually verify that, yes, climate change is happening and this is what it can mean. So thanks again for everyone, and thanks so much to you, Deb.
Well, you're most welcome, and I hope y'all have a great afternoon.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.